This is the 911 Sport Classic, Porsche's slightly retro celebration of its history, intended to evoke nostalgic vibes of the 60s and 70s with nods to greats such as the 2.7 RS. Sunglasses, model's own.
That's better. Back to normal.
The first 997 Sport Classic came out in 2009, and although it's sought after now, at the time people scoffed, because it was expensive, and so is this one. In fact, the 992 Sport Classic is
the most expensive new 911 that you can currently buy. £214,000 in the UK.
For reference, that makes it £35,000 more than the next most expensive, a Turbo S Cabriolet, in case you're wondering, and almost exactly £100,000 more than a manual rear-wheel drive GTS. So, why should you buy a Sport Classic? Well, for a start, just look at it. The Ducktail, the double bubble roof, the large Fuchs-style wheels, the heritage shields and gold, yes, real gold covered badges. I'm not a huge fan of the thankfully optional number decals, but even so, you've got to admit,
it does look pretty stunning. And as a result, we thought we ought to bring it to a road that's pretty stunning.
This is the Carfection Glacier Road. A day's access will cost you €25, but it is worth every cent. It's 16 miles long and rises almost 5,000 feet into the Austrian Alps, topping out at a breathless 9,022 feet or 2,750 metres. Along its length you'll encounter wildlife, some big, some small,
Mama!
and some somewhere in between. There are 29 hairpins on the way up, but 12 of them are packed into one crazy mile.
This is just amazing. It goes on and on, hairpin after hairpin. This actually feels slightly wilder to me than some of the other Austrian toll roads that I've been to, like the Grossglockner or the Knockhalmstrasse. It's no worse for it.
The heritage design interior of the Sport Classic is certainly a very nice place to admire the views from. Like the exterior, I think it treads the line between pleasingly retro and cloyingly cliched very neatly.
It does feel really quite luxurious in here as well. It's amazing the difference just different materials can make. Obviously this Pepita fabric on these seats, the lovely leather, the wood here, which is funny, isn't it? Because we think of that as sort of old-fashioned in a way, but somehow it feels quite modern now actually. It adds a nice warmth to the interior, this open pore wood. Love the green dials as well.
So it's got the visuals nailed, but unlike the previous Sport Classic, which was really only about the aesthetics, this version is mechanically interesting as well.
You see, it's got the turbo engine in it, so not the 3-litre turbo engine that you find in Carreras and the GTS, but the 3.7 litre turbocharged engine that you find in the Turbo. But it gets more interesting because this is rear-wheel drive and has a manual gearbox. Now obviously that turbo engine has been derated a bit, so we've got 542 brake horsepower, but then it's the torque that's really come down. So we've got 442 pounds-foot of torque, which is about 110 pounds-foot less than a standard turbo, and actually not a lot more than a Carrera GTS.
Just 22 pounds-foot in fact, and its identical 0 to 62 mile/hour time of 4.1 seconds reflects that. Nonetheless, this is still the most powerful manual 911 road car you can currently get, and when I first saw the specs, it got me wondering.
Could this be a sort of, well, something verging on a GT2, which is, after all, really a rear-wheel drive 911 turbo? The answer to that is no, it's not. That's certainly not the impression that I get from driving this. The vibe is one very much more of a more relaxed car. Yes, it is definitely chuffing quick, but it's certainly nice and easy to cover miles in. All the miles that we did to get down here from Stuttgart were no more stressful really than driving a Golf. This definitely has its own character, but it's more GT, and not GT as in GT department, as in Grand Tourer. It feels quite a weighty car. It's obviously got the bigger tyres, so 255s at the front, 315s at the rear, and the steering feels nicely sort of hefty, and there's an overall solidity to the car, particularly in the way it rides as well. It's about 60 kilos heavier than a GTS, but a little bit lighter than a turbo, obviously, because it hasn't got the drive shafts in the front. The ride feels pretty compliant. It's certainly not a loud car, and to the point where I've actually been driving this in Sport Plus pretty much all the time, just to try and get as much edge into the car as possible. It feels more planted than playful to me, certainly without the benefit of a track. It's obviously the 7-speed gearbox rather than the 6-speed that you find in a GT3 Touring, or GT3 obviously. But it's a pretty good shift actually, particularly on roads like this where you're not going anywhere near the 5th, 6th, 7th sort of plane. Rear wheel steer is definitely helpful on all these hairpins. Makes the car feel much more agile. It does take a while to pick up, but when it does, out of these hairpins, there it is, just now it goes. Colour of the water. Talking of which, let's talk about some wildlife that likes the water. There once was an ugly Ducktail. That's right, the aerodynamic spoiler that we all recognise from the 2.7 RS and which is celebrated in the Sport Classic wasn't always considered a thing of beauty and desirability. You see, originally it was developed because there was a sort of a front air dam, and it was a counterpoint to that, because otherwise the old 911 was a bit like an aircraft wing, and its racing drivers complained of lift, particularly in the high-speed turns. So Tillman Brodbeck lashed up something to sort of wood and sheet metal, which was pretty ugly. But when people first saw it, they said, "What is this Ducktail, this Bürzel in German?" And they said it not affectionately, but mockingly. Once, however, they saw the aerodynamic results of all that, well, people weren't laughing quite so much. And it's amazing, isn't it, how people's perceptions change. I love the Ducktail now. Right, off we go. Oh, it's good to be back amongst the mountains. I think it's probably a good job that this is turbocharged, because this road goes all the way up to 2,750 metres. Gets the old ears popping. Also very handy that this car comes standard with carbon ceramic brakes, given the long descent from the top.
So, is this latest Sport Classic worthy of being the most expensive 911? Is it that desirable?
Well, I think it depends how much you like the idea of a limited edition. Incidentally, this is not as limited edition as the 997 version. They produce just 250 of those, whereas they're producing 1,250 of these.
Aesthetically, just like that 997 version, I think this is a real hit. The best looking 992 in fact. Outside and in. I think I'd go for gentian blue, no decals, with this car's particular interior.
From a dynamic point of view, well, to be honest, I think I would save the £100,000 and get a rear-wheel drive manual GTS. Not because I don't like the way this drives, but just because I think actually that 3-litre turbocharged engine is more characterful. It revs more freely and sounds definitely better than this.
The Sport Classic certainly has an intriguing character that stands out within the 911 range, and I can understand some really liking its more laid-back, big boost demeanour. It just wouldn't be my choice.
However, as a companion for this piece of road, it's been rather wonderful. Wow, look at that view.